I'm just saying, Brian barked, waving his stupid clicker like it was a sword, and he was conquering PowerPoint. Support roles don't move the needle. Sales, product, revenue, that's who gets to sit at the grown-up table during the merger. He was talking to the entire exec team, but his eyes flicked just briefly toward me. Like I was a condiment in the boardroom buffet, useful until the hot sauce shows up. And everyone laughed, not Bella laughed. Not cackled, but the dry, echoey chuckles of people who don't know how to disagree with power in a room where the chairs cost more than their annual bonuses. So I just sipped my lukewarm coffee, crossed my legs, and tilted my head. I'd learned long ago how to disappear while listening harder than anyone in the room. That's how compliance works. You hear everything they don't want you to hear. You notice what they don't know they're saying. That morning, Brian was saying one thing very loud without ever moving his lips. I was on the list. Oh, and if you've already made it this far into the story, do me a favor. Hit that like button and maybe even subscribe. 90% of people never do, and honestly, it motivates the team behind this voice. Because telling these kinds of stories ain't exactly revenue generating either, but that doesn't mean they're not worth it. Anyway, this whole dog and pony show was the quarterly exec briefing. Most departments showed up with slick slides and jargon thicker than the cold brew. Brian, the COO, strutted in like he'd invented synergy. He'd recently read half a business book and was now obsessed with streamlining operational inertia. Translation: firing quiet people who don't kiss his ass in public. And I, apparently, had the audacity to exist in the corner of the org chart where no revenue streams flowed. Just process audits, policy reviews, and that teeny tiny thing called legal compliance. I've been at Telling Spark Systems for 9 years. 9 years of onboarding audits, ISO recertifications, data mapping, policy updates, and yes, lately, escrow documentation for the North Elm acquisition. I don't do fireworks, I do signatures, which in a merger are the fuse. But to Brian, that made me non-essential. A week later, the company-wide memo hit, titled Restructure for Growth, Aligning for the Future. It was dressed up in a lot of meaningless verbs, pivoting, integrating, harmonizing, but anyone with two brain cells and an Outlook calendar could smell the blood in it. Realignment meant one thing: someone's desk was getting cleared. I watched it happen in waves. First came the town hall, where Brian stood in front of a lukewarm Zoom crowd talking about leaner operations. Then the rumors began: who was staying, who was pivoting externally, who got quietly disappeared from Slack like they were never there. But me? I was still clocking in, still revising the escrow frameworks, still highlighting sections of the contract nobody else was even pretending to read. Brian had no clue I was even in the loop on the acquisition terms. That was the beauty of it. He saw me like an old printer, sometimes useful, mostly annoying, destined for storage. He didn't know I'd been looped in by Northelm's legal team 2 months ago, that I'd already signed off on 3 crucial compliance dependencies buried in the due diligence packets, that my initials, those invisible little letters, were quietly living in margin notes on documents he hadn't even opened, that I'd already found a clause, a special little clause. One that said, if certain conditions weren't met, including the continued employment of a named officer, the release of $48 million in contingent escrow funds would be nullified. A clause I hadn't written, but had permission to assign. And assign it I did, to me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, Brian had to finish his realignment. First, he had to lean in, raise his eyebrows, and ask me to share how I see my role evolving in the new revenue-focused structure. And I had to smile and say, quietly, because that's how all bombs tick, quietly, until they don't. By the time the first champagne bottle popped, my name had already been erased from the story. The Northelm acquisition was barreling forward like a semi with no brakes, and Brian was in the cab, honking the horn and waving to the crowd like he personally birthed the damn deal. Marketing had their glossy deck. Product rolled out a roadmap thicker than my compliance binder. Hell, even the receptionist was getting praised for setting the tone of excellence. And me? I got an Outlook invite that was accidentally sent to my spam folder. Title: Pre-deal celebration, revenue champs only? No joke, that's what it said. I opened it on my lunch break while eating a leftover lean cuisine at my desk, same desk I'd had for 9 years, next to the fire extinguisher nobody had inspected since the Obama administration. I stared at that invite, then deleted it without clicking yes or no. There's a special kind of silence that lives between being forgotten and being ignored on purpose. I wasn't sure which this was. I just knew Brian had his hands all over it. Later that afternoon, I got a note from Sandy, the admin who used to forward me meeting notes before Brian told her to reduce noise. Hey Jen, Brian said you're not needed at the M and a prep session next Thursday. Just FYI, smiley face. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the internal drive folder Brian was using for the deal prep. I wasn't technically supposed to have access, but technically is a word with a lot of holes if you help build the access protocols. Inside were 4 PowerPoint decks: marketing, product, finance, and Brian's exec summary. Now, let me tell you something about Brian's slides. They were beautiful, truly, pastel gradients, word clouds, stock photos of diverse people high-fiving over laptops, He even had a slide titled Revenue River where the growth flows, and not one goddamn mention of Section 9.2. Section 9.2, Compliance Dependencies Required for Escrow Disbursement. 4 bullet points. Each one needed to be signed, timestamped, and attached to the escrow schedule before post-close release. Guess who owned those signatures? Yours truly. Brian had pitched the North Elm deal as streamlined, turnkey, integration ready, but in his rush to toss confetti and climb the ladder to whatever corner office he imagined in the sky, he'd forgotten the plumbing. And I was the plumber. The compliance review had 3 unresolved items: the SOC2 audit refresh, DPA renegotiation for a legacy client in Ontario, and my favorite, Clause 7C. Clause 7C wasn't a compliance issue per se, it was a trigger. A little trapdoor in the escrow agreement that required a named officer, me, to sign off post-close before the $48M could be dispersed to Telling Spark. It was meant to ensure continuity, integrity, accountability. And Brian had no clue it existed, because the buyer's legal team had routed it through me as the compliance lead for final designation and execution. I chose myself, quietly. I didn't mention it to HR, didn't loop in legal. I didn't need to, the buyer had accepted it. The clause was live, and Brian, he was too busy booking catering. 2 days later, I walked past a pre-victory planning meeting. Through the glass wall, I could see Brian doing jazz hands at a pie chart while 2 product guys nodded like golden retrievers at a tennis match. He caught my eye as I walked by, didn't nod, didn't wave, just kept talking, and I smiled, not because I was amused, but because that's when I realized I wasn't being forgotten. I was being erased. Brian wasn't stupid. Arrogant, yes, vain, certainly, but not stupid. He knew I was in the room for the first 4 months of this deal, knew I'd initialed compliance checkpoints, knew my name was on the early drafts, but somewhere along the way, he decided to start rewriting history. A history where only revenue champions mattered, where back office support could be replaced with some cheaper version post-close. The thing about compliance, though, it doesn't care about your narrative. It only cares about the paper trail. And every page of that trail had my fingerprint on it, so I stayed quiet. Let them drink their champagne. I wasn't there for the party. I was building the detonator. It started, as most evil little joys do, with a PDF no one else bothered to read. I had pulled up the escrow agreement late one night, pure insomnia, the kind only underappreciated women in compliance departments know, the kind that hums behind your eyes and reminds you you've got 10,000 policies memorized, and 0 people who'd notice if your desk suddenly went dark. The document was 112 pages of contractual fiberboard. Legal boilerplate, contingency triggers, audit schedules, indemnity clauses, they were all there in stiff black type. And somewhere around page 87, buried between a section about payment holdbacks and a table so dry it could have started a brush fire, I found it. Clause 7C. Escrow release contingent upon signature authorization by named officer, employed at the time of post-close compliance review. Officer designation to be finalized no later than 30 days prior to anticipated close. I sat up straighter, reread it, 3 times. Then I leaned back in my creaky desk chair, still wearing an old bathrobe and chewing on a pencil I didn't realize had no eraser left. The wording was so casual, so innocent, but it read like a trapdoor rigged with fishing line and a hand grenade. Because here's the thing about escrow. Everyone talks about the money going in. That's the loud part. The investor memos, the earnings calls, the internal backslaps. But the money coming out, that's where the lawyers live. That's where people like me dwell. In the weird little corners where signatures and compliance overlap like 2 badly coded spreadsheets. Clause 7C made it very clear. If the named officer wasn't still employed at the time of the post-close review, the money stayed locked in escrow. $48 million. I could practically hear Brian calling that play money in some meeting, laughing into his artisanal cold brew while deciding who'd get what bonus when the funds hit. He had no idea that it could all get iced because he didn't read one clause written by a buyer-side lawyer who probably typed it half-drunk and dead-eyed at 2 a.m. And the designation to be finalized deadline? It was 3 days away, which meant I had 3 days to do something no one would ever see coming, pick myself. Now, officially, designation required an authorized signatory. In this case, me. I'd already been listed on all pre-close compliance correspondence. Northelm's legal team had looped me in directly months ago, assuming I'd be overseeing continuity tracking. So when the time came to finalize names for post-close release responsibility, nobody second-guessed it. I opened the editable form, entered my full name, date, title, digital signature, saved, exported, sent it off to the escrow custodian with the subject line, Final Designation Escrow Officer, Clause 7C. I even got the auto-reply, received, will process by end of day. No fanfare, no pushback, just silence. Exactly how I like it. By the time the deal team circled up that afternoon, everyone was too busy swapping jargon and salivating over their phantom equity jumps to notice a damn thing. Legal rep from Northelm nodded at me during a Zoom sync, eyes already glazed. Thanks for handling that clause finalization, he said. No pushback internally? None, I said, and there wouldn't be, because Brian didn't read things. He read moods, he read optics. He skimmed the first page of anything with numbers on it, then forwarded it to finance and called it delegation. Clause 7C didn't live on page 1. It was a ghost, a whisper. Claymore mine tucked under a welcome mat. And now if they fired me, if they streamlined me, if Brian tried to usher me out with a severance packet and a sugar-free cupcake, that $48 million would go nowhere. Not a penny released without my signature. Not a single champagne toast completed without my pen. And the best part, they'd already submitted the deal draft to the board. Meaning, clause designations were locked. There was no coming back from it. The only way to rewrite Clause 7C now was to renegotiate the entire escrow agreement, which would trigger a full re-review of the deal, something no one wanted to do this late in the process. So I closed the document, sat in silence. That quiet moment where you don't dance, don't scream, don't grin. You just know. You know that all the times you were talked over, overlooked, dismissed, they've crystallized into leverage so clean and sharp it doesn't even need to be swung. It just exists. I didn't need to fight. I'd already won. All I had to do now was wait for Brian to open his mouth and walk straight into the clause. It was the kind of meeting you don't get a calendar invite for. Just a knock on the cubicle wall, a fake sunny voice saying, "Hey Jennifer, do you have a minute?" Like they were asking if I wanted to try a new hummus in the break room. It was Brian's executive assistant, same one who used to triple book me during cross-department audits, now acting like she found Jesus and an HR certification. Her mascara was doing a brave job holding back what looked like sympathy, or maybe just secondhand cringe. I stood up, smoothed the front of my thrifted blazer, grabbed my notebook like I always did, though I already knew I wouldn't need it. Room 204. People Ops Huddle Room. Windowless. Beige walls, chairs that squeaked if you so much as shifted your moral compass. Brian was already seated, flanked by Janine from HR, who wore her usual empathy chic cardigan and had her laptop open like it was a shield. Brian smiled when I walked in, that kind of thin-lipped, prep school smile that says I've rehearsed this with legal and I'm still gonna mess it up. Jennifer, he said with mock solemnity. Thanks for. I nodded, didn't sit yet. I wanted to see who'd ask me to. Janine gestured to the seat across from them like a kindergarten teacher guiding a suspicious toddler to a timeout rug. Brian leaned forward, interlocked his fingers. So we're streamlining. There it was. Not downsizing, not restructuring. Streamlining. Because God forbid they use a word that might suggest they're actually cutting anything. They just want to sound like they're removing air bubbles from a spreadsheet. I didn't blink, didn't move. Just stared at him like I was watching a magician pull a pigeon out of a microwave. You've done excellent work, he said. No one's questioning your contributions. But as we look to integrate post-close, the acquiring company has emphasized revenue-generating alignment across roles. I wanted to ask if he practiced that in the mirror, or if he made an intern write it on cue cards behind Janine's head. He went on. Compliance has been, instrumental, but some of those functions will be consolidated. The systems you've built, rock solid, but they're transitioning to Northelm's frameworks. He was doing that thing where every compliment was the setup to a punchline. Janine chimed in. This is what we call a soft transition. You'll be fully supported throughout the offboarding. There it was, offboarding. Like I was a software plugin they were uninstalling with administrator rights. Brian smiled again, wider this time. We want to do this professionally. You'll stay through deal close. Final date would be May 28th. There's a severance structure. And of course, we'll celebrate your time here. Celebrate, Jesus Christ. I nodded slowly. Let the silence stretch just long enough for Janine to shift uncomfortably in her ergonomic chair. Thank you, I said. Brian blinked. He was expecting more. A protest, a tear, at least a little gasp, maybe a "but I've been here 9 years." Meltdown, instead I just smiled. I understand, that was it. He tilted his head, confused. You do? I do, I said, standing. You're streamlining. It makes perfect sense. Janine started to say something, maybe about next steps, but I was already moving toward the door. I paused just long enough to make sure Brian noticed what was still clipped to my hip. My badge still on, still active, still swiping green. He tried to recover. You'll get a calendar from HR, exit interview, transfer of duties, you know the drill. I nodded again. Sure. And I walked out of that room like I was walking off a porch and into a thunderstorm I'd already waterproofed my soul for. Because here's the thing Brian didn't know, what nobody in that building seemed to understand. I wasn't afraid of being offboarded. I was counting on it. He thought he was handing me my ending. What he was actually doing was pressing the detonator. The clause had already been signed. My name already enshrined in legalese that outlived mood boards and pie charts. And now, with that little speech, Brian had created the exact conditions that would choke $48 million in escrow until the forgotten lady in the beige cubicle, decided otherwise. I went back to my desk, sat down, opened a new file, labeled it Release Protocol Pending Signature. Then I poured myself the last cup of coffee from the burnt office pot, took one long sip, and whispered to no one, "Offboard this, motherfucker." 2 days after Brian handed me my walking papers with a smile that looked like he practiced it on a dating app profile, I scheduled a document alignment call with the buyer's legal liaison. No one questioned it because no one ever questions compliance meetings. Assume it's just another round of policy mumbo jumbo with no bearing on bonuses or backslaps. That's where they're wrong. The liaison's name was Amit, dry voiced, razor sharp, based out of North Elm's Baltimore office. We'd traded a few emails before, but nothing meaningful. This call, however, would be different. I opened the Zoom 10 minutes early. That's how you mark territory in the corporate jungle, by being the first face on the screen. Amit joined at the dot of 9, camera off, voice clipped. Jennifer, he said, appreciate you making the time, of course. Just wanted to confirm a few final pieces for the close. Specifically escrow terms. He didn't react. These guys don't. Corporate lawyers are built from Kevlar and cold coffee. But I could hear the soft clack of him pulling up the dock on his end. I've been reviewing Clause 7C, I continued, calmly as a weather report. Wanted to confirm that the named officer designation is fully executed and understood by your team. Brief pause. A pen clicked somewhere in the background. Looks like we have you listed, yes, he replied. Jennifer Halden, Director of Compliance. Signature received, custodian acknowledged. I nodded once, even though he couldn't see me. Perfect. We don't anticipate any issue as long as you're present at post-close review. Understood. I ended the call 8 minutes later. No fanfare, no sudden revelations. Just quiet, professional confirmation that the lock was sealed and I held the key. They'd written the clause, I just slipped into it like a second skin. That afternoon, I printed exactly one page. Clause 7C, highlighted in orange, not too bright, just enough to make it pop on a conference table without looking like a trap. I placed it in a plastic sleeve, slid that into a navy blue folder, and clipped it behind my performance packet. The same one HR had given me to sign during offboarding. Untouched, unsigned. Like a dinner invitation I never planned to accept. No one saw me prep. No one asked what I was doing. I was a ghost in the building now, politely disappearing, smiling in hallways, declining cake, and quietly canceling recurring meetings. You'd think I was going out with grace. In truth, I was building my kill shot. I made 3 copies of the page. One stayed in the folder. One went into a locked drawer in my desk. The third I left in the passenger seat of my car, just in case Brian tried something theatrical like cutting my access early or sending security to escort me out. He'd want it to look professional, efficient, like a captain guiding a broken rudder off the ship. But I wasn't the rudder. I was the ballast, and they'd just yanked me loose. That night, I didn't celebrate, didn't pour wine or blast Aretha. I sat in silence, watching the folder on my kitchen table like it might whisper back. Clause 7C stared at me in fluorescent toner, the words crisp, final, unblinking. Escrow release contingent upon signature authorization by named officer in the world of contracts. Clauses don't scream. They whisper. They wait. And when activated, they don't explode, they collapse the room from the inside, like a lung gone still mid-breath. Brian had no idea. No clue he'd already crossed the event horizon. He was still hosting Synergy happy hours and sending all company Slack updates about cross-pollination wins like a man campaigning for a role no one had offered. Meanwhile, I was practicing my signature. 3 times on a scrap notepad. Smooth, deliberate, the way I'd sign it when the moment came. Not for approval, for release. Not for team. For a sum, I wasn't angry. I wasn't smug. I was ready. And readiness doesn't brag, it just shows up. The conference room was booked under the name Project Sunrise, as if that would make the slaughter feel inspirational. Long oak table, 12 leather chairs, one too few for the number of egos in the room. It was the final M and a review, the day North Elm's people sat across from ours and pretended to be impressed while secretly calculating who they'd keep, who they'd gut, and who they'd send a fruit basket before locking them out of their inbox. I arrived 10 minutes early, navy blazer, plain notebook, the blue folder tucked like a loaded weapon beneath my arm. My badge still worked, green light, soft beep, no drama. HR hadn't deactivated anything. Yet. Inside, the air reeked of ambition and someone's peppermint essential oil diffuser. Brian was already there, of course, center seat, arms wide, voice louder than the HVAC system. He wore his best I'm about to be a VP at a bigger pond grin, the kind that made interns spontaneously update their resumes. I stood near the door, waiting. Didn't want to assume a seat. That's how they get you, claim you were overstepping. Sandy, the admin who'd once slipped me early drafts of contracts out of spite for Brian, approached with a clipboard and a smile too tight. Jennifer, we've got you just over here, she said, gesturing toward the side wall. A folding chair, no table access, no mic, no nameplate, I nodded. Perfect, I said, and took the seat like it was my throne. Brian didn't even look up. He was mid-joke with one of the product guys, something about revenue funnels and the fat we've trimmed. The room chuckled politely. Eyes darted toward me, then away. The lawyers arrived next, 2 from North Elm, both in slate suits and armed with laptops that probably cost more than my car. Then came their integration lead, a woman named Darla, clipboard clutched like it contained nuclear codes. She scanned the room, nodded at faces, gave me the kind of smile you give a barista who spells your name wrong. Everyone sat, everyone but me. I stayed on the edge, opened my folder, flipped slowly to the page. Clause 7C, highlighted, clean, waiting. My fingers stayed on the edge of the plastic sleeve, casual as you please. I didn't stare at Brian, didn't fidget. Just watched and waited while he laid out his vision with the subtlety of a used car dealer on Adderall. Let's be real, Brian was saying, standing now, because of course he stood, clicking through slides like a televangelist. We've doubled ARR, consolidated our GTM funnel, and cut non-revenue roles across the board. This deal isn't about legacy, it's about trajectory. Everyone here moves the needle. He paused for effect, looked around like he was waiting for applause, then casually he gestured toward me. Even Jennifer here's been great. Compliance, yes, but post-close, we've got that function slotted into Northelm's automation stream. Elegant, efficient, no redundancy. Translation, she's already gone, but let's clap for her like she died in a war. No one clapped. Darla just wrote something down and Brian moved on. I didn't speak, didn't blink. Because that's the thing about corporate meetings, they only fear voices that arrive too late. Silent ones, they never see them coming. Halfway through, finance walked in late with revised projections. Brian called them hero numbers. The integration lead chuckled. Everyone else nodded like their bonuses depended on it, which, to be fair, they did. But the tension in the room wasn't about the charts. It was about the clock. Everyone knew this was the last lap. One wrong name, one misread clause, and the entire $180M transaction would slow to a crawl. The lawyers knew it, the buyers knew it, and Brian, he was still floating, too high on himself to feel the air thinning. They moved to the Q&A. Any concerns about compliance rollover? One of Northelm's attorneys asked. Brian waved it off like a mosquito. Handled, everything's documented, systems in place, no blockers. Darla turned to me. Jennifer, anything to add from your side? I looked up, met her eyes, and smiled. All in the documents, I said, every signature accounted for. She nodded, satisfied. I flipped another page, didn't show it, not yet. Brian kept talking, kept posturing. And for a moment, I almost felt bad. Almost, because here he was, selling a vision of a company already built on the backs of people he considered irrelevant. He thought he was playing chess, but he'd handed me the king weeks ago, tucked it neatly in my folder, and never even asked if I was still on the board. The final slide came up, projected synergies, post-close bonus structures, integration timeline. Revenue driving roles only, Brian repeated with a smirk. Everything else, streamlined. He said it like he was quoting scripture. I sat there, still and composed, like a witness waiting to be sworn in. My folder was open. My clause was ready. And the room had no idea the trap was already live. The final Q&A began like all corporate Q&As do, half-hearted, over-rehearsed, and soaked in smugness. A Northelm VP with a jawline that belonged in a pharma ad asked about post-integration synergies. Brian answered in buzzwords so thick you could spread them on toast. Alignment, velocity, stack optimization. He said seamless 5 times in under a minute, which should have triggered a fine from someone. I waited. My hand never left the folder. Darla turned to Brian. Before we wrap, any final notes on staffing transitions? And just like that, he took the bait. Oh, absolutely, he said, grinning like he just landed a text invite. Look, we've taken a scalpel, not a machete, to the team. We're keeping what drives revenue, period. And he glanced in my direction. Not even directly, like I was a smudge on his peripheral vision. And let's be honest, he added, louder now, voice puffed with bravado. Jennifer's been here a while, solid, but she's never contributed to revenue. The room went quiet, not frozen, not awkward, just expectant, like everyone felt something shift but didn't know what yet. I let the silence breathe. 2 beats, 3. Then I reached into my folder, pulled out the page. Clause 7C, highlighted, crisp. I slid it gently across the polished table toward Northelm's lead counsel, a man named Corbin who hadn't said a word since the meeting started but had spent the entire time watching everyone like he was preparing a deposition. He blinked once, picked up the page, read it, and then everything stopped. No gasp, no scream, just silence, dense, pressurized. Corbin read it again, slowly this time. His eyes scanned the clause, then stopped at the signature. My name, my title, dated, sealed. He looked at Brian, then at me, then back at Brian, and then he asked it. The sentence that detonated the room without raising its voice. Is this your final approval to fire her? His tone was calm, even, but it hit the table like a thunderclap. Brian laughed, the kind of nervous chuckle that sounds like a car failing to start in January. Wait, what? He said. Corbin didn't blink. Per Clause 7C, she is the named officer responsible for escrow disbursement. Her continued employment is required to release the $48 million post-close funds. That's the language here. He tapped the clause, twice. Brian's face drained so fast it looked like someone unplugged him from the wall. That's not accurate, he stammered. That clause was boilerplate. We've got systems in place. She's transitional. Corbin didn't look away. She's the only listed signatory. Signed, dated, accepted. You submitted this version to our board. Janine from HR shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Darla leaned forward like she was watching a surgery. The product guy who spent the whole morning double-dipping croissants suddenly found the floor fascinating. Brian was flailing now. Wait, this is a misunderstanding. Jennifer, you didn't tell anyone you weren't supposed to. I turned to him, calm, quiet. I was told I'd be offboarded professionally, I said, so I prepared accordingly. Corbin held up the page. If she's terminated before the post-close compliance review, the escrow funds remain locked. That's how this reads. And unless there's a countersigned override, which I have not seen, this clause stands. Brian looked around the room, searching for an ally. No one met his gaze. Then Darla spoke, quiet but deadly. If the escrow funds don't release, the deal stalls. Full reevaluation. Our board won't like that. Brian opened his mouth, closed it. Corbin leaned back, turned to me. Jennifer, he said, are you willing to remain in your role through post-close review? I smiled. Depends on the terms. And just like that, the air left the room. Everything Brian had paraded for weeks, his charts, his catchphrases, his revenue river, evaporated under a single line of legal text he never bothered to read. No one spoke. No one dared. I didn't need to raise my voice. The clause had already spoken. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees, even though the HVAC hadn't clicked once. Corbin set the paper down like it was radioactive. His expression never changed, but something in his posture stiffened. There's a kind of corporate stillness that only lawyers can conjure. Vacuum sealed around a single line of contract text, where even blinking feels like a liability. We had arrived. Darla looked from the page to me, then to Brian, who was now visibly sweating through his stretch cotton button-down. He didn't move, couldn't, probably trying to mentally rewind through weeks of slide decks, wondering which meeting he skipped that allowed this to happen. Without her signature, Corbin said, tapping the clause once more, can't authorize the escrow release. Which means we don't close, which means this deal, it doesn't happen, simple, cold, final. Brian snapped out of his trance like someone poured ice water down his spine. Okay, hold on, this is just a technicality. We can amend, right? Redraft the clause. We have time. His voice was rising, the way it does when a man realizes the boat left shore and he's still holding the oars. No, Corbin said, folding his hands. You submitted the final version. Your board ratified it. We ratified it. Altering escrow terms now would require reapproval from both boards, legal and financial, at minimum a 6-week delay. Darla cut in. Our CFO will pull out. She's already on edge about the projected synergy timeline. This clause changes her risk profile. Translation, Brian had just triggered a $48 million tripwire. Silence. All eyes turned to me. Visible woman in the folding chair. The support role who wasn't invited to the pre-deal celebration. The one Brian said never contributed to revenue. And now they were stuck and I was the lever. Corbin cleared his throat. Jennifer, he said, this time with just a touch more respect, would you be open to remaining through the post-close period? As the designated officer, I kept my face still. Neutral. Let the pause bloom. The room leaned in. Depends on the terms, I said. Not smug, not sharp, just matter of fact, like I was reading back their own documentation. Darla nodded once and scribbled something in her notes. Brian stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled. I need a minute, and just like that, he left, tugged the door open and vanished into the hallway like he'd heard his own eulogy and wanted to rewrite it in real time. A second later, we all heard his voice rise. I wasn't told. This is bullshit, Greg. She sandbagged us, no, you approved the final, don't pin this, no, she's playing games with, the door closed again. The sound muffled, but the meaning clear. Brian was burning. Back in the room, I crossed my legs, uncrossed them, flipped the folder shut and rested my hands on top. I didn't speak. I didn't smile. I didn't fidget. Let them sweat. Janine from HR stared at her lap like she'd just watched a horse get shot at a birthday party. One of the product leads started tapping his pen against his pad, then caught himself and stopped. Corbin, ever the professional, just adjusted his glasses and said, we'll take a short recess. That's legalese for Brian's toast. Let's find a way to keep the adults in the room from suing each other. I didn't move. Outside, voices rose, hushed, rose again. Then, silence. 10 minutes passed. 15. The door opened. A different VP from our side stepped in, and I'd only met once. He looked drained. Brian won't be returning, he said. He's taking a leave effective immediately. He sat down in Brian's still warm seat, looked at Corbin and said, let's move forward. Then he turned to me. Jennifer, we'd like to revisit your role in the post-close period. Would you be open to discussing terms? I waited a beat, then gave a soft nod. I'm listening. And still I didn't smile, because the win wasn't the power shift. It wasn't the panic or the hallway shouting match. The win was sitting perfectly still while the man who erased me got erased by the very clause he never bothered to read. And now, revenue had a new definition, one that spelled my name correctly. They offered it to me the next morning, no small talk, no flowers, no elevator pitch. Just a clean 2-page PDF in my inbox titled, Offer Post-Close Role Proposal, Director, Risk Strategy, Double Salary, Full Independence, Remote Optional, reporting directly to North Elm's SVP of Compliance. No mention of telling Spark. No dotted lines back to anyone who'd tried to push me out. And Brian, not even CC'd, he was already gone. I heard through the Slack grapevine that he was taking time to recalibrate, which is corporate for we shredded his badge and scrubbed his face from the onboarding slides. His name had been quietly removed from the transition org chart. Quarterly email series, Brian's Bridge to Synergy, was quietly archived. His inspirational quote boards deleted. No one said it outright, but everyone understood. The man had tried to fire the wrong ghost. I didn't ask for an office. I didn't ask for a signing bonus. I didn't counter or posture or ask to circle back with my people. I just typed one word in response to the offer. Accepted. That afternoon, I walked into the conference room for the final signatures. Same room, same table, new seating arrangement. I was at the center now, across from Northelm's legal team. Darla handed me the escrow release packet, already pre-filled with my name, my title, my digital signature box waiting. Once you sign, she said gently, we're officially closed. I nodded, clicked the pen open. My fingers didn't tremble because this was not a victory lap. It was a dissection, and I was the one holding the scalpel. Corbin watched me like a proud surgeon watching a student make the final incision. He said nothing, but there was respect in that silence now. Kind of hush that only happens when someone realizes they underestimated the quiet one in the back row. I signed, click, done, 48 million released, M and a finalized, positions reshuffled, and one woman with a folder full of footnotes now owned the only legacy that mattered, leverage. As I stood to leave, Sandy, the same assistant who'd pointed me to the folding chair during the review, approached with a plastic knife and a trembling smile. There's cake in the break room, she said softly. Sheet cake, there? Celebrating the close. You staying for a slice? I looked her dead in the eye. No smile, no bite. I don't eat cake at funerals, I said. And I walked out. No confetti, no applause, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd played the game by their rules, only better. I never raised my voice. I never threw a tantrum. I just raised a clause, Clause 7C. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again.